I'm the founder of WDS. We have a great team, but all of us are the first to recognize that, what makes it a great community is at least 50% composed of the community. It's like the people that come, they are bringing something that creates whatever that magic is that people feel. And so I always want to acknowledge that first. I guess second, though, I would say that I also believe in a curated experience. I also believe in an agenda, in putting forward a message. I think people should do this more in their art or their work.
I'm Srini Rao, and this is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast, where you get a window into the stories and insights of the most innovative and creative minds who've started movements, built thriving businesses, written best-selling books, and created insanely interesting art. For more, check out our 500-episode archive at unmistakablecreative.com. Chris, welcome to the Unmistakable Creative. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it is my pleasure to have you back here. It's a bit weird to have to introduce you because it's very unlikely that nobody in our audience has actually heard of you. But on the off chance that they don't know about your work, can you give us sort of the quick Reader's Digest version of who you are and your work and how you have arrived at all these crazy things that you're up to?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure there's lots of people who haven't heard of my stuff. So I'm a writer, traveler, entrepreneur. That's kind of the three-word elevator pitch. I've been publishing a blog for about 8 years, The Art of Nonconformity, which initially began out of a quest I had to visit every country in the world. When I was a bit younger, I lived in West Africa for 4 years as a volunteer, did a lot of traveling then. Loved traveling, loved goal setting. So I set this, project to go to every country in the world. Started writing about it, and fortunately, I realized that the project was much deeper than just, my own little journey. So I did complete that quest a couple of years ago by my 35th birthday. But then I started writing about all these amazing people that I meet all over the world. So published a few books, have a new book out called Born for This. And I feel very fortunate to connect with great, amazing people all over the world.
All right. So I want to do something that we didn't get to do the first time that we talked to you. And I want to talk about the earlier part of your life prior to everything that we kind of know you for and everything that you do on the internet, like growing up, childhood, parents, significant experiences, because, the things that you've chosen to do with your life, like I don't imagine that, anybody wakes up one day and says, what I have as a goal is to visit every country in the world. Right. So I'm just curious, what are the kinds of things that happen in your life that would lead you to down this trajectory and make these kinds of decisions?
Yeah, well, that's a great way to start because I think people always think that there are these big strategic visions, like when I was 10 years old, I was like, I want to grow up and be an explorer and go everywhere. And so then I prepared, for the next 15 years and my college and first jobs and all. And none of that was the case, of course. I knew I had a love for travel. I had a mom who was married to a military guy, my stepdad. And so he took us to a bunch of different places. Just because of his assignments. So I lived in the Philippines for a while, kind of got comfortable with some cross-cultural stuff. So I had this early kind of travel thing. But, lots of people travel and most people don't necessarily, get this idea to go everywhere. So I think like what I see if I look back is like it's a series of a bunch of random stuff, which, eventually kind of work together to create this focus that I have now. But even in the focus, like I think you mentioned it when you asked me for the brief introduction, you said like you have a lot of different projects. And I have a lot of different projects because I'm not good at doing just one thing. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of strength in someone who's like, I'm just going to do this one thing and do it well. And I think you can go far with that, but that never really worked for me. So I kind of evolved, along the way. Different things happened that led to something else. And then I was interested in something and I pursued it. And maybe that worked out or maybe it didn't. But eventually it kind of forges into something greater, but it wasn't a grand vision at all. Mm.
So, when we look back at our own lives and we look at all these random things that we've done, are there ways that you can connect the dots looking back, at your own life experiences and tie them together in such a way that it leads to something that is meaningful to you?
Yes, I certainly can. And I think most people can. I think most people who are on a journey, whether it's like trying to find the work that they were meant to do, which is kind of my current focus in helping people, or just something else, I can absolutely connect the dots, even though it seemed random at the time. Mm-hmm. I wasn't good at working for other people. I wasn't a good employee. I was really good at working on something I was motivated for. Like I like to work, but it was really hard for me to accept someone else's vision or work towards something that maybe I wasn't excited about. And so that's why I started working for myself. And in the beginning, it wasn't like I want to be this great entrepreneur. I don't think I even thought of the word entrepreneurship at the time. It wasn't like I want to change the world and, inspire people to think differently or something. It was more like, how can I pay the bills, without reporting to, someone else's work site? And then like time goes by and I start thinking, okay, what can I build with this? And then later I get maybe a deeper desire and say, okay, well, it's great that I can make a living for myself or whatever, but that's not really, like the next level of things. So it's kind of like the travel goal. It was great that I was traveling for a while, but what's the next level of that? So it's a series of stages and interlinked, pieces along with many dead ends, but eventually it kind of builds to something.
Well, let's talk about the dead ends and moments that didn't really work out and what you've learned from those and how you've applied those going forward.
Well, I had lots of little businesses that never worked out. I mean, I had this great idea for a golf membership site that cost $1. And I remember I was like building this website and I was thinking, oh, this is the greatest idea because there's so many golfers out there and, I just need like 1% of them to pay $1 or something. And somebody said to me like, it's going to be kind of hard to have a business model, where your most expensive product is $1. And of course, I was like, no, it's going to be great, and of course it wasn't. It was a total flop and did a lot of things kind of like that were super random. And I think what saved me was I didn't invest a lot in them. I kind of would spend a little bit of time on these things, a little bit of money, if any money at all. And then if it didn't work, I would just kind of move on to something else. But if I found something that worked a little bit, I would kind of go further in that. And I saw that not just with business ideas, but, with hobbies. I had a million random hobbies and wanted to do a lot. I was a musician for a while and I liked playing bass. I was pretty good at playing bass. I was okay at playing keyboard or piano, but I wanted to learn to play like every instrument. So, there's like a drum set in my house. There's like a bunch of guitars and a violin and a saxophone and all this stuff. And obviously I'm not really good at any of these instruments, but I'm just kind of pursuing different stuff and kind of going down different paths. And after I got, tired of that or realized that wasn't going to be, what I did with my life, I would move on to something else.
Why do you think so many people hit a dead end and then don't do anything else?
Yeah, great question. Maybe they're afraid to quit. Maybe they're like, I've already invested in this, like I've got sunk costs, or maybe the costs aren't financial, but like I've spent some time doing this. And, I think most people fail to kind of back out of those dead ends and pursue something different, not when they're terrible at it, but when they're just okay at it.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's really dangerous. And I actually have ran into that many times in my life. Like, because I am kind of motivated, I can work hard. Like, I can be fairly good, at a number of things. And probably a lot of the listeners, are the same way because the listeners are motivated, for their creativity, motivated to inspire, motivated to improve themselves, all that kind of stuff. So if you're good at a lot of different things, that's when it's kind of hard to back away from the dead ends because it's working out okay. It's all right. It's not amazing. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a real skill in being able to say, it's not amazing, therefore I'm going to back away from this dead end and try something else.
How do you balance that ability to do that with the longevity that's required to achieve mastery at a particular craft?
I don't think everybody has to worry about mastery so much, at least for a while. The mastery comes, when you find something that you truly do love, and you don't just love it, but you're actually pretty good at it. Whether it's this natural gift or whether it's something that is developed. I mean, mastery is kind of like next level of something, and it comes when you're already on that path. I don't necessarily think you could be on this path for a year or 2 years or whatever the time period is. I don't know if the time period really matters. Mm-hmm. And then feel like, oh, you've got to keep going to achieve mastery or something. I think mastery is the goal. If you have something clearly affixed in your mind and you're like, this is who I want to be. Like I am a painter, I paint in this style. I want to learn some different art forms, but really like, this kind of painting is what I want. Then you pursue mastery. I guess my concern is a lot of people don't know that yet. A lot of people are still trying to figure it out. And so don't beat yourself up over like failing to pursue the course of mastery if you're not sure what you're supposed to master.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. It's interesting because I think for me, I started out primarily as a writer, and I actually stopped, running a blog because I realized that putting all my energy into interviewing people was a much more effective use of my time.
Sure. That's great. So you could have just kept going, right?
Yeah.
It would have been okay.
Yeah.
Like you would have been all right, but you found something better, more effective, and so it didn't matter what you had done before. And in fact, probably what you had done before helped you, in the interviewing process. But even if it didn't help you, it's done. You found something better.
Yeah. And it took a little bit. I think part of it is letting go of attachments that we have to these things. And, it's like you said, the sunk cost thing can be really, really insidious if we're not careful.
Yeah, of course. Sunk costs, it's in our nature to protect our sunk costs. It's like you're in the grocery store and you pick the wrong line to be in with your cart of groceries. And this new line opens up and it's going to be so much faster, but you're afraid to leave because you've already waited, 10 minutes. And if you just wait like a few more minutes, you might be at the front of the line, but it's very hard to like give up and go and do something else. And I feel like that affects lots of people's decisions in life, whether it's like changing their college major. Oh, I found what I really want to do, but I've already taken these courses. Maybe I should just, see it through, or whatever the situation is. And we have sunk costs. They're gone. You can't recoup them. You have to always think about the present moment and think about what you're working toward in the future.
What are your thoughts on the role that persistence and grit play in these kinds of accomplishments that people dream of achieving throughout their lives?
I have a complicated relationship with persistence because it's just like working hard. Like I can be really, really persistent. I guess what I now see as a weakness, and I do think like being able to be persistent overall is a strength. But I think the challenge is you can work really, really hard at the wrong thing, and no matter how hard you work, you're not going to make the kind of substantial or exponential progress that you need to make if you're not doing the right thing, right? Yeah. So, my weakness is like, I will tackle anything. I'll be like, I'm going to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to work all day on this. I'm going to, crush this out or whatever. And somebody else might be a little bit smarter and say, okay, but if you made these couple of different decisions, about how you're structuring whatever it is you're trying to achieve, maybe you didn't need to get up at 4 a.m. or maybe you didn't need to accomplish that goal in that way at all. So I think that's the challenge.
All right. Well, I think that makes a perfect setup to, doing a deeper dive into the psychology and mindset that goes into something like a 10-year quest, like visiting every country in the world. I'm curious, one, what enables the mindset for something that significant? Do you think everybody has that capability? You think it's something that can be learned, or is something that is inherently built into certain people?
Yeah. Okay. Great questions. Lots of things there. I do think everyone has that capability. I don't know whether it's, innate or learned. I do think everyone has the capability to identify a quest or a long-term journey or pursuit. It need not be, a quest to visit every country in the world or something that involves travel or the physical world. I do think we're kind of drawn to that. I do think it's exciting. I loved just traveling in general, but once I had the specific goal of like every country in the world, it made it so much more exciting. And, I got a lot of criticism early on of like, well, you're just going to countries to check them off the list. And I would say, well, I actually like going to countries. I like the part about the travel, but to be fair, I actually do like the part about checking them off the list. It's actually kind of fun to like have this list of things, and I'm working toward it. And eventually, if all goes well, I'm going to succeed in it. And I thought about sunk costs a lot too, during that process, because it was not always enjoyable. It was not always amazing. But I guess for me, I still believed in it. I believed in the long-term value of it. And then at a certain point, I think momentum does kind of kick in. If once I had made it to 180 countries, like I wasn't going to stop no matter how I felt, to get to the final 13 or whatever, because I knew I would always regret it if I didn't. So definitely like having that fixed goal is something that I think is valuable, both for having the destination and the journey. I think people, used to ask me a lot, isn't it all about the journey? Isn't it all about the journey? Well, it ultimately is all about the process of whatever it is. But I really do think having an endpoint, in mind also helps a lot.
Did you ever want to give up during the time? And if so, how did you navigate those periods?
I never seriously wanted to give up. I had frustrations, but no, I never seriously thought about giving up. Overall, I enjoyed the long-term aspect of it, even if not every part of the short-term aspect was, and many parts of the short-term aspect were enjoyable. So I guess I thought of it as worthwhile.
So the capacity for these kinds of accomplishments, you said that everybody can learn this. I'm curious, what are the things that people can do in their lives to develop this capacity?
Well, experiment. We talked about that a little bit in the beginning. Try different things, learn broadly, take on different skills, do things that you're a little bit uncomfortable with, be clear about your motivations, check in on your feelings, check in, like, how does this make me feel? Like, what do I want at any given time? And it doesn't necessarily mean you're always going to, respond exactly corresponding to what you feel like, because if you're running a marathon, you might not feel that great, at mile 23, but, it's something you believe in, you're going to keep going. I do think it's helpful to kind of do those gut checks and to always be working towards something, to always be challenging yourself. I think it's a dangerous place to be in when you ask yourself, especially as a creative, as an entrepreneur or an artist, whatever, when you ask yourself, like, how am I being challenged? And you don't have a good answer for that. I think that's kind of a warning sign that maybe you need something different. And it doesn't necessarily have to be bigger or better, but maybe you need something different.
So this is fresh on my mind because I've been going through Donald Miller's book again, and sometimes I'll turn to it, just to read in the morning, which is something I do before I write. And I was thinking a lot about this, especially because I was trying to write something about this morning, about why so many sort of successful people have had these just massive failures or significant life events that precede their success. And it seems like an inciting incident is the catalyst for the really significant accomplishments of almost every single person I've interviewed, with rare exception. Okay. And I'm just curious, what you have to say about that, what your own experience has been with that, through the lens of the people that you've come across through your own work, and through your own experience. Yeah. I mean, the inciting incident, is interesting. I think it's probably fair to say that anyone who makes a major change in their life, anybody who achieves something remarkable or even attempts something remarkable, I'm sure there's some moments you can point to, but I don't know if it necessarily always has to be this huge moment. Maybe it's a series of things that kind of, led up to an inner dissatisfaction and an inner discontent that was then kind of called upon or rallied, in a sense of like, okay, I feel this stirring in my soul, to go and do this thing or whatever. And maybe this thing is totally crazy. I talked to a lot of people, like in particular with the last book, The Happiness of Pursuit, which was focused on quests, talked to a lot of people who, used this very similar language when they began their project. And they always said, I had this crazy idea that wouldn't leave me alone. And so they kind of responded to the crazy idea. And then they're like, maybe it's actually feasible, maybe. And the more they thought about it, the more excited they got. And then they did it. But I don't know that everybody has something truly dramatic necessarily that incites that change. And in some ways, it's more interesting if you don't have this obvious thing to point to, I talk to a lot of people who are trying to become self-employed. And they write in from their cubicle or wherever and say oh, I'm not supposed to be reading your website. I'm on lunch break or whatever, but I'm really trying to establish some kind of freedom business for myself. And the people who are able to do that, especially people maybe who are married, have kids, have responsibilities, or maybe they're a bit older, they actually have something to lose. They can't just risk everything and walk away and move to Thailand, become a location independent blogger or whatever, those people who are actually able to deliberately make change and then achieve mastery or whatever, go out on their own. That's kind of more interesting in some ways
than the person who, was fired from their job in some dramatic scene. And then all of a sudden they had this imperative, they had to make a living. And so they became an entrepreneur. Like, to actually take responsibility and create change without a huge inciting incident, like that to me is almost like inspires more motivation.
That's interesting. I've never heard it from that perspective before, but it is interesting to look at that way. And, I appreciate the fact that you're willing to point out that these kinds of things, like just, quitting your job and going to Thailand and becoming a location independent blogger, is not realistic for everybody, because, at times I can't help but wonder if the internet has perpetuated this sense of like false hope and this mantra of all of this nonsense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've probably been part of it too. I always try to, I have to face facts, like I try to always qualify these things, but I mean, there is a dream out there. Like, people are selling the dream in different ways. So I think it's important to underline the dream with, disclaimers and practical, mostly helping people how to do it. But sure, there's lots of stories of people who struggle doing that, or maybe they actually are able to do it and realize it's not that great, or it's not what they really wanted, So probably better to help people figure out what it is they really want and how they can get that.
Well, let's do this. Let's shift gears a little bit, and let's talk about the World Domination Summit. What I really specifically want to talk about is the psychology behind how something like that happens. Because, in so many ways, you've created this sort of microculture that happens. And, it's funny. One of my friends was kind of jaw dropped when he walked into the auditorium. He's like, oh my God, he almost felt it was cult like, which was really fun. And because he was an American. And I remember that comment very distinctly. And I remember thinking, the next time I get to talk to Chris Guillebeau, I want to ask him about the psychology of creating a movement like that.
Okay. Wow. Great question. So we actually are really careful about, having it not described as cult-like, for probably obvious reasons. It's a community. It's great, great people. I would say, secondly, like I'm the first, I'm the founder of WDS. We have a great team, but all of us are the first to recognize that, what makes it a great community is at least 50% composed of the community. It's like the people that come, they are bringing something that creates whatever that magic is that people feel. And so I always want to acknowledge that first. I guess second, though, I would say that I also believe in a curated experience. I also believe in an agenda, in putting forward a message. I think people should do this more in their art or their work, not just like explore a bunch of topics, but let's actually like put something forward and challenge people and tell people how they can do something, right? And so I knew from the beginning I didn't want to create an unconference per se, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I guess what I wanted to do is like actually we do want to bring people together, encourage a sense of community, but we also want to have some pretty clear values of our own that are driving it. And one of them was the no sponsor thing. We don't want corporate sponsors. It's not that I think corporations are evil by default. I just don't want to mess with that. I want to preserve the integrity of the branding. I don't want to put other people's logos everywhere. And I want to make sure that the programming, is somewhat consistent. So I guess, I don't know. I believe in like creating this experience and doing everything we can, but then like it meets, the other 50% of the equation, which is all the great people who come. And then hopefully, something good is created from that.
It was interesting. I remember running into somebody at the last WDS that I was at, and they're like, "Who's Chris Guillebeau?"
That's great. That makes me happy.
Yeah. Well, at that point, I realized, I was like, wow, you've created something that bigger than yourself. At that point.
Makes me really happy. That's definitely the goal, right? In the beginning, it was like people from the blog and stuff that were coming, and then like now it's great that other people are there. It's perfect.
So you mentioned 4 words in particular that got my attention. I want to do a deeper dive into all of these. You mentioned magic, curated, agenda, and message. And I am curious how we start to incorporate those 4 things into our own work. Find the magic that exists in our work, curate it accordingly, be deliberate about what we do, and find the message that we're meant to share with the world. Which I realize that's a whole interview in and of itself.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. So we'll try to consolidate. I think I would flip magic and put it at the end.
Okay.
So you got curate, you got message. What was the other one?
Agenda.
Okay. So kind of put message and agenda a little bit together. And, what I would suggest to anyone who's listening who wants to have a blog, wants to be a writer, wants to put forward some kind of creative project. Definitely think about what you have to say. Speaking of the location independent, blogger who moves to Thailand, I think this has kind of died down a little bit, which is great. But for a while, I used to hear from so many people who were like, hey, this is the life I want. More or less, I want to work for myself, travel everywhere, et cetera, et cetera. So my blog or my project, whatever it is going to be like the discovery process of my life journey to that. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, it's really not that interesting. It's really not that interesting of just one person here finding my way. You really have to extrapolate beyond that and figure out, okay, are you trying to help other people do that? But if you're just trying to figure it out yourself, how is that helpful? There's probably something else that you can do or teach or share, some deeper message. And let's figure out what that is. And let's put out the agenda, right? The agenda is consensus is overrated. Here's what I believe in. Come and join me if you agree with this or you like these values. We need you. So I think that's really important. Message and agenda, and curation, I guess, is the expression of that. Curation is how do we share that? What are the strategies? What are the mediums? And who are the speakers? Who are the voices? How are we going to get this message or agenda out to the world? And then magic is the part you can't really control it. There's no magic button, unfortunately. Staples maybe has that, you press the thing. But magic is this element where if you do everything right and you do allow for enough, organic change to influence the process as well, I guess you're always hoping that the magic is going to come in. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. But when it does, it makes whatever it is that you are creating so much better. And that turns that into that community thing, or that blog post that goes viral, or that thing that really changes people's lives. And so I think when people try to harness it or try to direct it or be like, here, I'm going to add a sprinkle of magic, it doesn't work super great. Mm-hmm. It's something you have to set everything up as best as you can, but then you lay your offering at the altar of the gods of whoever decides that stuff. And then, they kind of siphon out who gets the magic and where it goes. I don't know. What do you think about that?
So I don't know about you, but vacuuming is not one of those things that I ever look forward to doing. But as you know, your environment has a huge impact on your creativity. So I still like it to be clean wherever I'm living and working. But now it doesn't have to be something that you deal with. If you're like me and you grew up in the 80s, you probably fantasized about the day when cleaning your house would be like it was for the Jetsons, meaning you don't have to lift a finger. Well, the good news is that we're already kind of living in that future. And the easiest way to make sure your floors are clean every day is with the iRobot Roomba Robot Vacuum. It cleans up after itself. The Clean Base automatic dirt disposal takes convenience to a new level, automatically empties its own bin into an allergen lock bag that holds 60 days of debris and traps 99% of pollen, mold, and dust mites, so you can forget about vacuuming for months at a time. Let the Roomba clean for you instead. It learns your home, finds dirt, and empties itself on its own. It's got powerful cleaning performance made effortless. Remember, if it's not from iRobot, it's not a Roomba. To learn more, go to irobot.com/unmistakable. I'm not done yet. That raises more questions, but you probably expected that.
Sure.
The deeper message, you think that everybody has that in their lives?
Deeper message
behind their work.
Yeah. I think everybody has a compelling reason for it, and that's interesting. And, I think when we say deeper message, again, we have to be careful because, we can go deeper into figuring out what the root of that is, but deeper doesn't necessarily imply some philosophical truth that has never been shared before. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be like this epiphany, right? The Steve Jobs moment on the stage or whatever, however you think of it. But I think everybody does have, at the root of their lives, when they really get closer to finding something, that has this convergence between they're good at this thing, they love what they're doing, and it's somehow sustainable. They found a receptive audience for it. Then I think there probably is a deeper message for it.
With that being the case, why do you think we see such a varying degree of success with people's expressions of that message?
Well,
because my bet, and I'll I wouldn't interrupt you after this, but I'm betting for every person who buys your books out of the hundreds, 1 in 100 probably does something with it.
Yeah, probably true. And I would say also, I mean, the example I would say is like, well, I'm fortunate that, a couple of my books have done well, but I know lots of other authors who've written amazing books, very helpful, great resource, but they haven't, been commercially successful, or they haven't gotten in the hands of a lot of people or whatever. So, why is that? It's not that, my book is so much better than theirs or whatever. Maybe theirs is better than mine. So I don't know. I guess maybe that's, somewhat marketing. Maybe it's somewhat the magic. Maybe it's a combination of things. Maybe it's like, how much work are they putting out? And I don't want to necessarily get into like this thing of like, he who puts out the most work wins, because I think that can be dangerous too. Mm-hmm. You could just be putting out, the wrong kind of stuff, like we mentioned. But I do think like the more chances that you have at something, the better. So I guess generally speaking, instead of like slaving over something for 10 years or whatever, I would rather kind of put the balance on, I'm going to come out with something on a much more frequent basis. And maybe not all of it's going to be a home run, but I'm going to try to, hit some solid things.
So I want to ask you a question that I asked a handful of people that I've had here on the show in the last probably 5 to 6 months. And this has come up multiple times for me because I'm still not satisfied with the answer I've been given by anybody.
Okay.
So Chris Sacca, the venture capitalist, has said time and again in every interview that I've seen him do in the media that when he invests in one of his founders, the one thing that he has seen in all the ones that have become successful is that they believe that their success is inevitable. They don't speak in conditional statements.
Yeah. Okay.
And so 2 questions come from that. One is, did you believe your own success was inevitable? Actually, more than 2 questions now that I'm asking them.
Sure.
Is the inevitability of success something that can be learned? And I'll remember the other one in a second.
That's fine. Okay. Yeah, that's good. Okay. I mean, like, I feel like I should like qualify it in some way, but I would say, yes, I believed I was going to be successful. I believed it was inevitable that, if I pursued this quest, I would be able to see it through. I believed it was feasible. I didn't know what would come of it. I didn't necessarily know all of the outcomes. But yes, I guess, at its core, I did believe, that it was going to be successful. The thing about the founder is, and I'll come back to your second question in a second, but the thing about the founder story, I like that too. I think, everybody has to have the confidence, not the delusional confidence, hopefully, but everybody has to have the confidence that they're on the right track. It is going to lead to something that they hope to achieve. I mean, the 2 points would be like, there's probably, CEOs that he has interviewed or looked at that also had that confidence, but he didn't believe in their business model. Mm-hmm. So he didn't fund them. So it's not just like, this is the only quality. And, the other thing is like, from the outside, we could look at, a whole panel of CEOs and just know statistically that a lot of them are not going to be successful. So it's not so much that like everybody has to have this thing, but people in that situation, if they have it, I guess they're more likely to have it. So is it something that can be learned? I don't know. I don't know if I have a great answer. And if you've had other people on and haven't been able to give a satisfactory answer, I don't know if I could top it, because how do you teach that? How do you teach someone like really believe in what you're doing? I think it's more of a discovery process that, when you find that thing you really believe in, maybe you have an innate personality that kind of leads you to believe in your own success, but then you also believe so much in what you're doing that also adds to it.
Yeah, I mean, I asked the question not because I'm expecting a concrete answer. In fact, my favorite questions are the ones that don't necessarily have concrete answers.
Sure.
Just because they lead to such interesting discussions. Actually, this was the third question, I realized. So this was based on a conversation I had with a mentor, and he had said that we are not all created equal. And in our sort of new agey self-help driven world, we don't acknowledge nearly enough the role that talent and intelligence play in these kinds of accomplishments, like the Elon Musks and Mark Zuckerbergs of the world. And, the thing is, the stories we hear are stories like yours, stories like Tim Ferriss. And, in a lot of ways, these are outlier stories. So I'm just curious about your thoughts on the role that talent and intelligence play in the kinds of accomplishments that, we talk about and celebrate.
Sure. Well, talent and intelligence, but also privilege. I would kind of put that there and say, well, I had different opportunities that maybe other people didn't have, and it's not because I was smarter. It's not because I was, better at something. I had a difficult childhood. I was a juvenile delinquent for a while, so that was not super intelligent. But I was able to kind of make my way out of that. And some of that could very well be due to privilege, or to having upper middle class parents, who cared enough to come and get me out of jail or whatever. So I kind of go towards that. I think all of these things combined, definitely have some influence on who we become, right? For sure.
So you said you were a juvenile delinquent for a while.
Yeah.
There's no way I'm going to let you off the hook with just that. I want to hear more details. I want to hear about this story. I've heard, I've heard through the grapevine about some of this, but I wanted to get it directly from you.
That's great.
I'd love to hear about it in more detail.
The grapevine of delinquency. Well, the thing about being a juvenile delinquent is you can't be it for too long, right? You either grow up and go to prison, or you kind of reform one way or another. So, where to start with that? Yeah, I thought I would be a good criminal at the age of 13, and I had a little small shoplifting ring for a while. When I say shoplifting ring, it's me and my friend and my friend's sister, and we would steal things, and thought I was really good at it. But then obviously, the thing with long-term crime is, you can get away with it 20 times in a row, but then you get caught the 21st time. It only takes once, right? So that didn't work out super great. And then I learned to drive by stealing a car. That was at age 14. And also didn't work out super great. My friend and I successfully stole the car and drove it around all night. So we thought we were awesome. But then as the sun rose or whatever, we're like, what do we do with this car? And so we decided to park it somewhere, but ran into a brick mailbox. Somebody called the police. Police showed up. I was arrested. There were more things. There was a series of kind of, bad choices that happened over, 3 to 4 years or so. And finally, I guess I came to my senses and realized that's probably not the best, career path or life path for me. Mm-hmm. But, like I said, it could have gone another way, it could have gone a different way. And maybe I would never have the chance to go to college or whatever, or the chance to, forge those early years of entrepreneurship or, all that kind of stuff.
What are the lessons in human behavior and personal relationships from that time that have actually played a role in the way you've run your business and your life later on?
Yeah, that's funny. I don't really think about those days very often, but they were very formative, I'm sure. I guess maybe there was an element of creativity to it, a desire to kind of say, is there more than one way to do this, right? And if I want... and at the time, this was very undeveloped thinking. At the time, it was I want the new Metallica, cassette at the time. I don't want to pay for it, therefore I'm going to steal it. So that thinking evolved, and I stopped stealing things. But maybe I continued, throughout college, throughout entrepreneurship, throughout Africa, throughout travel, blogging, et cetera, just always asking, is there another way to do this? Here's the traditional way. Is there not a shortcut? Is there not a fast track? Do I need to do all these prerequisites, to accomplish this one thing that, supposedly is going to take so much time? So for sure, that was part of it. And maybe some confidence too, although that's ironic because I wasn't successful, I wasn't successful, but I guess like those CEO founders, I believed I would be. Thankfully, nobody invested in me at the time.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think that the theme that I keep hearing throughout all of your answers is one of resourcefulness.
Yeah, that's good. I like that word. I like resourcefulness. And I guess I always wanted to, try something new. If something failed, I wouldn't necessarily try the same thing again, just like I stopped stealing cars, after the bad experience at age 14. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I guess I would always try to find another approach or do something different. And I'm still focused on the goal, even if I'm willing to change the strategy, which I think is a wonderful, thing that entrepreneurs or artists or anybody else can do.
So one last question before we start getting into the framework that the book offers. I know, earlier this year, or I guess it was last year, you lost your brother. And, you know, I've had a lot of conversations with people around navigating periods of extreme grief and how they've pulled out of them. It seems like it's almost just kind of part of every hero's journey. And, you know, I'd be curious about, you know, kind of what your experience was with it, how it's affected your work, and how it, more importantly, has affected your sort of perspective on life.
Yeah. I'm not afraid to answer that question. I just don't know if I really know how to at this point, because I actually feel like I'm still very much in that.
Fair enough.
And, you know, it's been, let's see, at the time we're recording this, it's been 8 months or so, but it honestly still feels very fresh to me. And so it is something that has affected like everything. And I think the long-term effects are still to come. I feel like I am a kind of a slow processor. And what I've learned about grief, you know, thus far is that there are different stages. And by stages, I don't just mean like, you know, the 5 stages of grief or whatever. I mean more like seasons. And so you kind of settle into different seasons, you know, at different times, maybe depending on how long it's been, maybe for some other factors. So it's not something that I really had a lot of experience with, at least not this kind, until that happened. So I'm still kind of figuring it out.
Fair enough. Well, let's do this. Let's shift gears and let's get into the framework of the book and this whole idea that we're born to do certain things and we can find what those things are.
Yes. So this book, like all my other stuff, kind of comes from the community. It comes from conversations I've had with different people. And this one in particular, just the notion of finding your dream job or creating your dream job. You know, run into a lot of people who say things like, "Oh, I love what I do. It's the best job in the world. I would do it for free, but I don't have to. I feel like I've won the career lottery." So I'm thinking that's really interesting. And what do these people have in common? Like, did they always know what they wanted to do, or was it, you know, more of a nonlinear journey? Did they do a lot of different stuff like I did? And how did then how did they come to what they're doing? How did they decide if they wanted to work for themselves or if they wanted to be part of a larger organization or company? Because for years, my message has always very much been focused on entrepreneurship, because that's what I know. But I guess, you know, one thing I learned is that there's a lot of people working entrepreneurially within a larger company or an organization because that's the kind of work they want to do, or because they're a better fit, you know, in that kind of environment, or for some other reason. So just trying to unpack the lessons and, you know, the experiences of those people, and then present them in a way that's not just, you know, anecdotal or journalistic, anthropological, but actually prescriptive, and saying, okay, for everybody out there who wants to improve their life or work, everybody out there who's trying to find the work they're meant to do, you know, believes there is something out there for them, whether it's just like the ultimate one path, or maybe there's more than one path, but I'm trying to find the best one. Like, how do you actually do that? So that's what the new book's about.
So let's get into how you actually do that. You know, I know you one of the things that said on the back of the book was, you know, finding sort of this intersection of joy, money, and flow. So let's talk about those 3 things in more detail.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I touched on them, you know, briefly without naming them that earlier in the conversation. And I think what I found through a lot of different research is, you know, people are different. We all want different things. We all want to pursue different kinds of work. We have different working conditions, which are really important to pay attention to. A lot of people always think about their career just as this like one word thing. I want to be a designer. I want to be an engineer. I want to be a teacher. But there are many different ways to do all 3 of those careers. I mean, there's lots of different kind of forms and fashions of them. And that's where working conditions is so important to focus on. But joy, money, and flow is essentially something that I think everybody wants. And I think everyone wants to do something that they love, or at least that they enjoy. That's where joy comes in. You want to take pride in your work. You want to be, you know, eager to get to it in the morning or whenever it is you get to it. And money is that sustainable piece. Like I'm not really writing about hobbies. I'm writing about careers. And so if there's something you love to do that doesn't make money, that's fine, but that's not your work, or at least your income producing work. And then flow is essentially developed skill, or that point of which we can lose ourselves in our work, you know, and hours go by because we were really good at it. And maybe it's something that we're good at that other people are not good at. It comes naturally to us. And so the intersection of all 3 of those things, that convergence point, joy, money, and flow, is essentially the goal. And I think that's So you ask how people find that. I think you begin by making decisions. Whenever you come across a career decision you have to make, whether big or small, you ask yourself about these points: joy, money, and flow. Does it meet all three of these things? If I'm deciding between two things, which is the closer fit? And I think in different times in our life, we may have to make compromises, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. Like you might work a job that you don't necessarily love for a while because it pays well, it provides for something else. That's totally fine. But if we're talking about the goal of if you could do anything, if you could win that career lottery, then it is something that has all three of those things, I think.
So given my personal experience, a question that raises for me is why in our lives do we often miss or overlook those points of intersection when they happen?
Well, I don't think anyone teaches us to be aware of them.
Yeah.
And then I also think it's part of the thing about you can look back on the best moments of your life, but you don't always necessarily know, during the time. So, but we can't do anything about the second thing, but maybe we can do something about the first thing, about just, beginning to have more awareness of that, being to have more, checking in with our feelings, and then combining the feelings check with a more objective research-based check, where we're kind of okay, am I really good at this thing? Does it produce the kind of income that I would like, et cetera? And putting those things together, I think, is really important.
You mentioned that nobody teaches us these things. Given that you go down to grad school, have a master's degree, what is your perspective on education from the vantage point that you have now?
Yeah, my perspective on education. I think fortunately education is changing and has changed in some ways, and at least in terms of a recognition that there is more than one path. It's kind of like working for yourself in general. Mm-hmm. I've worked for myself my entire adult life. I'm 37 now. When I was in my early 20s, it was kind of a weird thing. There were plenty of other people, doing business online at the time, even then, but I didn't really know any of them. They were kind of scattered everywhere, and parents didn't really understand what I did for a living. But now I think people are coming up, and it's much more common, to work for yourself. And I think that relates to that other thing. It's just now with education, it's much more common to pursue a different path and have that be totally okay. I don't regret any of the education I had. I think it was very helpful in maybe teaching me to write well, maybe teaching me to formulate arguments, maybe teaching me some social skills that I didn't get during the juvenile delinquent years. But it clearly didn't really prepare me, for a specific career track, at least not in line with the investment that I made in it.
Mm-hmm. When the visiting every country in the world thing was done, do you feel any sense of emptiness, or the sense that something was missing in your life because this thing that has driven your life for so long is suddenly over?
Absolutely. Completely.
And how did you cope with it?
Well, that does probably have a 5 stages of grief thing. That probably is linear, because you're well, got to accept it somehow. It was hard. And I saw that with everybody else that I studied in the book about quests. Everyone talked about this of you come to this end and you've been looking forward to it for so long, but now what are you going to do? Because for years, you've been that person who's pursuing this goal, and that's a big part of your identity. You can have lots of other identities as well. You could be a spouse, you could be a parent, you could be, whatever your career is, all that stuff. But, alongside those things has been, I'm so-and-so, and this is what I'm doing. So as to how you cope with it, I think eventually you reflect, you process, you try to appreciate the lessons, but then you have to move on to something else.
Yeah.
Because if you just live in that same thing, I think that just gets depressing. Nobody wants to be around the guy who's talking about what he did back in high school, mm-hmm. Or when he played football or something. We all know people that 20 years later, 30 years later, however many years, they're still kind of reliving these glory days. And I don't think that's healthy. I think what's healthy is continuing to challenge ourselves.
Do you have any new quest that you've decided on? And then, after such a sort of massive gargantuan quest, does it feel like anything else sort of pales in comparison when you think about it?
Well, that was the problem, It was how do I top that,
Yeah.
And I guess also I didn't want to top it in the same way or start something new that was the same kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
I wasn't going to go back to every country in reverse order. I wasn't going to go to the moon. People suggested that, on my book tour, people are why don't you do that? And I was well, you can do that. That would be great for somebody else. No, I wanted to. I think the next quest essentially, maybe it's a little bit more difficult to define, and a little bit more deeper. It's essentially more about investing in community and more about like truly, developing this idea of how do we live a remarkable life in a conventional world, and how can we see that scale? Not scale in the sense of a traditional startup, but how can we equip more people to do that? I don't think I've found the metric for that yet. I don't think I've found like, here's how I know that will be a success, which really is important in a quest. But I think then the focus, for me now is not on so much like a physical accomplishment or achievement, but, kind of delving deeper into the whole purpose of all this stuff, which is what you do so well on this podcast.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Wow. So in terms of WDS, what's next? I know you've scaled it back, made it smaller from what I remember.
Yeah, this year, we were doing two things. It's a twofold approach. And, sometimes twofold approaches work really well, and sometimes you should just focus on one thing. So we'll find out. But the twofold approach is the kind of the main immersive component of main stage WDS, the weekend experience, is scaling back to 1,000 people. And we want to provide an even more immersive experience for those 1,000. I've been very happy that the event has grown in recent years, but I also am empathetic to the concern that like, maybe it's like, I get lost in the crowd. I don't want anyone to feel lost in the crowd. We have lots of introverts. I'm an introvert. We have lots of highly sensitive people. We have lots of people who don't necessarily go to like a lot of business conferences or other traditional conferences. I want to make sure we're really like, meeting their needs in that regard. So that's why we're doing the main stage thing. But then at the same time, we are growing like everything that surrounds that. So there's going to be lots more stuff that happens during the week. It's kind of moving to a whole week-long focus for us. So some people participate in the whole week, and some people participate just in that immersive weekend. And some people will just come to some supplemental things that we do during the week. So the new experience is going to be called WDS Connect, and that's for all the people who don't have main stage tickets but do want to be part of the community. So they can still go to meetups, they can organize meetups. There's going to be some art exhibits, a bunch of other stuff, essentially, that will allow us to serve a larger population for the whole experience, but then a more select population for the weekend.
Wow.
So we'll see how it goes. I mean, like this is our first year doing it, so you'll have to let me know, or any of the listeners who show up, be sure to let me know.
Well, this has been really, really awesome. So I have one last question, which is how we finish all our interviews at the Unmistakable Creative. What do you think it is that makes somebody or something unmistakable?
The willingness to find whatever that thing is for them. I'm talking about the book a lot these days, so I keep using this phrase, the thing that they were born to do. And if readers or listeners don't like that phrase, no problem. Just think of this thing. There's this thing out there. There's something out there that you have to find. And maybe it's a missional thing. Maybe it's a calling. Maybe it's a life quest. Maybe it's a business. Maybe it's an artistic expression. Maybe it's something that I haven't mentioned at all. But there is this thing out there. And, to be unmistakable, you keep forging your way toward it, and you don't necessarily even know what it is in the beginning. Just like I certainly didn't know like where I was going with my life or whatever, back when I was stealing cars, or even when I was an adult, right? But you keep working toward it, and you do back out of those dead ends that we talked about, and you do find another way forward. You try again, but you don't try the same thing necessarily. You're unmistakable because you keep working toward that, and you do everything that you can to find it.
Well, Chris, this has been phenomenal, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join us and share your story and subject yourself to my crazy questions.
This is great. This is so fun. It's so much better than tell us how you started your blog. So thank you for the wonderful questions, and I hope to hear from some of the listeners sometime.
Awesome. And for everybody listening, we will wrap the show with that. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. While you were listening, were there any moments you found fascinating, inspiring, instructive, maybe even heartwarming? Can you think of anyone, a friend or a family member who would appreciate this moment? If so, take a second and share today's episode with that one person, because good ideas and messages are meant to be shared.